There is a category of naval operation that combines the highest political sensitivity with the most compressed operational timelines and the least margin for the kind of deliberate, measured response that commanders prefer when they have the luxury of time. It is called a non-combatant evacuation operation, NEO. The mission is simple in concept and brutally complex in execution. Extract American citizens from a deteriorating situation ashore, move them through a contested or uncertain environment to a vessel offshore, and complete the extraction before the situation ashore deteriorates past the point where extraction remains possible. The clock runs in one direction. The political pressure runs in every direction simultaneously. And the naval commander executing the operation must hold two contradictory requirements in balance at the same time. Maximum speed in the extraction to protect the civilians being moved, and maximum restraint in the response to any interference to prevent a humanitarian operation from becoming a military confrontation that costs more lives than it saves. The port of Djibouti, formerly the Republic of Djibouti, a small nation at the southern entrance to the Red Sea, where the Gulf of Aden meets the strait that separates the Horn of Africa from the Arabian Peninsula, hosts more foreign military installations per square kilometer than any other nation on Earth. The United States maintains Camp Lemonnier there, the only permanent American military base on the African continent. China maintains its first overseas military installation there, the People's Liberation Army Support Base, operational since 2017, equipped with a pier capable of berthing warships and a logistics infrastructure that the People's Liberation Army Navy had been quietly expanding in the years since the base's initial establishment. France maintains a base. Japan maintains a base. The geographic logic of Djibouti, its position at the choke point between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, its proximity to the instability of Yemen, Somalia, and the Horn of Africa, has made it one of the most militarily concentrated small nations in the world. The political crisis that had developed in Djibouti over the preceding 11 days was the kind of crisis that intelligence analysts recognized as a type, but that always presented differently in its specific details. A disputed election, a governing coalition that had fractured under the pressure of economic grievances that had been building for years before the election, provided a focal point. Street demonstrations that had escalated beyond what the government's security forces could contain without employing levels of force that had their own escalatory logic, and a port district where the foreign military installations and the diplomatic community and approximately 400 American citizens, contractors, aid workers, business personnel, family members, were located in proximity to neighborhoods where the violence was now close enough that the State Department's emergency threshold had been reached, and the order to execute a non-combatant evacuation had been transmitted to the 7th Fleet at 14:33 on a Tuesday afternoon. The carrier strike group had been in the Gulf of Aden for 6 days, positioned there in anticipation of exactly this contingency. The intelligence picture had been tracking the Djibouti situation's deterioration with the kind of attention that the combination of American military installations, diplomatic presence, and civilian population warranted. When the evacuation order came, the strike group was 112 nautical miles southeast of the port, close enough that the first helicopter sorties could be reaching the designated pickup zones within 40 minutes of launch authorization. But the planned support base was in Djibouti too, and the 3 planned vessels that had been berthed at that base, a Type 052D destroyer and 2 Type 054A frigates, in port for what the public schedule described as a routine logistics call, had departed the harbor at 14:51, 18 minutes after the American evacuation order had been transmitted. The departure timing was not coincidental in any assessment that anyone in the strike group's intelligence section was willing to defend. It was a Tuesday. The time was 15:22 local. The Gulf of Aden, east of Djibouti, was running with the moderate northeast swell of the winter season, the sky clear, the afternoon sun at an angle that put the western horizon in glare that degraded optical identification at range, but did not affect the radar picture, which showed the 3 planned vessels on a course that was taking them southeast, directly toward the carrier strike group's position. The carrier was already executing the evacuation mission. MH-60S helicopter sorties were launched and inbound to the designated collection points in the port district. The first sortie, 4 helicopters, capacity 32 evacuees, had departed the flight deck at 15:09 and was currently 12 minutes from the collection point. On the carrier's flight deck, the next sortie was being prepared. The operation had its own momentum, its own timeline, its own requirements that did not pause because 3 planned warships had just departed Djibouti harbor on a bearing toward the strike group. In the Combat Information Center, the watch team was managing 2 parallel tactical pictures simultaneously. The evacuation operation with its helicopter tracks and collection point status, and the shore situation feed from the tactical operations center ashore, and the developing contact picture to the northwest, where the 3 planned vessels were now 18 nautical miles out and closing. The commanding officer arrived in the CIC at 15:24. She read both pictures. She looked at the planned vessel's course and speed, 24 knots, bearing 125 from the carrier's position, geometry indicating an intercept of the carrier's operating area in approximately 40 minutes. She looked at the helicopter sorties, already airborne, the civilians being moved toward collection points, the timeline for completing the evacuation. She looked at the ESM display showing the planned vessel's radar emissions. Active, search mode, tracking. "Well, what are they transmitting?" she asked. "A search radar active on all 3 contacts, ma'am. Internal plan network traffic consistent with coordinated operation. Fire control systems in standby. Not active, not locked." Not locked. Watching, not targeting. The same distinction that mattered in every gray zone encounter, where presence and capability were being demonstrated without the threshold of targeting being crossed. "Continue the evacuation," she said immediately. "Nothing about the planned contacts changes the evacuation mission. First sortie completes its run. Second sortie launches on schedule. The civilians come first." She looked at the surface warfare coordinator. "What does the geometry look like for their CPA to our operating area? If they hold course and speed, lead contact closes to approximately 8 nautical miles of our current position in 38 minutes, ma'am. We will have sorties airborne during that window." Helicopters airborne between the carrier and 3 planned warships closing at 24 knots. The geometry was what it was. "Contact 7th Fleet," the captain said. "Flash traffic. 3 planned vessels departed Djibouti. Inbound our position. Intercept geometry during evacuation window. We are continuing the evacuation. We are monitoring the planned contacts. We are not altering the mission." The flash traffic went out at 15:27. At 15:31, the first helicopter sortie reached the collection point in the port district. The FLIR imagery from the lead helicopter, transmitting back to the CIC in real time, showed the collection point, secured by a small Marine security team, evacuees assembled, the controlled urgency of people who had been told to bring one bag and move. The first helicopter touched down at 15:33. Loading began. In the CIC, the planned contact picture was updating every radar sweep. The 3 vessels had maintained their course and speed. The lead contact, the Type 052D destroyer, was now 14 nautical miles northwest. The 2 frigates were trailing at 16 and 17 miles, respectively. "Channel 16, the captain said. English and Mandarin. The transmission went out at 15:34. Planned vessels bearing 315. This is a United States Navy carrier strike group conducting a non-combatant evacuation operation in accordance with international law. We have United States civilian personnel being extracted from Djibouti by helicopter, currently airborne. You are closing our operating area at speed. We request that you reduce speed and maintain a distance of no less than 15 nautical miles from our current position to ensure the safety of our aircraft and our civilian passengers. This operation is a humanitarian mission. All your movements are being recorded and transmitted to United States Indo-Pacific Command. This is our advisory, humanitarian. The word was precise and intentional. The Channel 16 transmission established in the record that the operation underway was the extraction of civilians, not a military operation in the sense that created any legitimate basis for interference, but a humanitarian mission of a category that international law regarded with specific protections. The planned commanders and their shore authority heard the word. Their lawyers would note it. The planned formation did not reduce speed. It did not respond on Channel 16. At sea, distance is language, and 24 knots toward a carrier conducting a humanitarian evacuation was a sentence that required a response calibrated to the specific gravity of the situation. The captain made her next decision at 15:38. Launch the Seahawk. Position it between the lead planned contact and our operating area. 1,000 feet. FLIR running. I want the lead contact's deck and bridge clearly imaged. She paused. And I want the E2D picture on the secondary display. Everything the Hawkeye is seeing over the strait. The MH-60R Seahawk was airborne at 15:41, climbing to 1,000 feet and banking northwest toward the lead planned contact at 12 nautical miles. The Seahawk's FLIR acquired the Type 052D within 90 seconds of reaching its intercept position. The destroyer's hull clearly visible from 1,000 feet. Her deck layout, her weapons mounts, the crew activity that the thermal imaging could characterize without optical identification at this range. The FLIR showed the Type 052D's 130mm main gun mount in its stowed position. Her YJ-12 anti-ship missile canisters were in their standard stowage orientation. Her crew was at stations. Elevated readiness, not combat stations, but not the relaxed watch standing of a vessel conducting a routine transit. In the CIC, the first sortie was reporting completion. 31 evacuees, loaded and airborne, returning to the carrier. The second sortie, 4 more helicopters, was already inbound to the collection point. The evacuation was proceeding. The timeline was holding. At 1544, the plan formation altered its geometry. Not a course change. Their bearing toward the carrier's position was unchanged. But the formation spread. The 2 frigates moved laterally, one north and one south of the Type 052D's track, creating a line abreast formation that broadened their collective front from approximately 2 miles to approximately 6 miles. A line abreast across the American helicopters' return path from the collection point. The geometry tightens. 6 miles of planned warships spread across the corridor between the collection point and the carrier. The Seahawk pilot reported the formation change at 1545. The captain looked at the updated tactical display. The spreading formation, the helicopter sorties between the carrier and the coast, the evacuation timeline, second sortie at the collection point, third sortie being prepared on the flight deck. She ran through the geometry in 2 seconds of professional analysis. Channel 16 again, she said. Same frequencies. The second transmission went out at 1546. Planned vessels. This is the United States carrier. Your formation is now positioned across the return corridor of our evacuation helicopters carrying United States civilian non-combatants. We have women, children, and medical personnel currently airborne in this corridor. Any maneuver that endangers these aircraft will be considered an act of interference with a humanitarian evacuation operation and will be reported as such to the United Nations Secretary General, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the International Maritime Organization. We are asking you formally and directly to open this corridor. Our helicopters are inbound with civilians aboard. Women, children, medical personnel. UN Secretary General, ICAO, IMO. The second transmission escalated the legal architecture of the situation explicitly and publicly, placing the plan formation's commanders in the position of making a decision whose consequences were now framed in terms of international humanitarian law rather than merely operational geometry. Whatever happened next, it was happening with those frameworks explicitly invoked and explicitly recorded. At 1549, the lead planned destroyer reduced speed from 24 knots to 16. The bearing rate on the contact updated, the closure rate to the carrier's operating area decreasing. The northern frigate, watching the lead vessel's deceleration, reduced speed as well. The southern frigate held at 24 for 40 seconds before it also reduced. The geometry began to ease. At 1552, the second sortie completed its collection run. 29 evacuees, loaded, airborne, returning to the carrier. The return track was still within the spread plan formation's position geometry, but the formation's reduced speed had opened the critical distances as the helicopters flew through the corridor. The Seahawk maintained its position between the lead plan vessel and the carrier's operating area. The FLIR was running continuously. Every development was being captured and transmitted. At 15:58, the captain authorized the next proportional step. Not the laser designator, the situation's context, with civilian helicopters airborne and humanitarian law explicitly invoked, required a different tool. Put the FA-18S airborne CAP station between the planned formation and our operating area. Standard intercept posture, weapons safe, visible. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets launched at 16:01, climbing to 15,000 feet and establishing a combat air patrol station that placed them visually above the corridor between the planned formation and the carrier. At 15,000 feet, they were visible from the planned vessel's bridges. Their presence spoke in the language that every naval aviator and every naval officer who had operated in contested airspace understood. These aircraft are here. They are above this corridor, and they are watching everything that happens below them. The planned formation continued to decelerate. By 16:04, all three vessels were at 8 knots. Their line abreast formation was no longer closing on the carrier's operating area at a rate that threatened the evacuation corridor. The third sortie launched at 16:07, 4 helicopters outbound to the collection point, passing north of the planned formation's northern frigate at a lateral separation of approximately 4 miles. 4 miles between a helicopter carrying evacuation equipment and a planned Type 054A frigate. The space was adequate. The helicopters transited without incident. The third sortie completed its collection run at 16:19. 33 evacuees, the largest single load of the operation. They were airborne and inbound to the carrier as the fourth and final sortie launched at 16:22. By 16:31, the planned formation had altered course. Not back toward Djibouti. They were not retreating. They were repositioning. But to the northeast, away from the carrier's operating area, their formation opening into a wider dispersion that was consistent with surveillance rather than interdiction. They were watching. They were present. They were no longer positioned across the evacuation corridor. The fourth sortie completed its collection run at 16:38. 41 evacuees, the last group at the primary collection point, including 7 individuals who had required medical assistance to reach the pickup zone. 411 total evacuees across 4 sorties. The collection phase was complete. The captain transmitted to 7th Fleet at 16:41. Evacuation complete. 411 non-combatants aboard. 4 sorties, 0 casualties among evacuees. Planned formation currently bearing 305 at 11 nautical miles. Reduced speed, surveillance posture. F/A 18 CAP, maintaining station. Seahawk recovering. Full reconstruction package follows. She looked at the tactical display. The planned formation at 11 miles. Their formation open. Their speed low. Their fire control system still in standby. The carrier's flight deck cycling through the completion of the evacuation sorties. The medical teams meeting the helicopters. The organized process of receiving 411 people who had been told to leave everything behind and get to a collection point. Full reconstruction, the captain said. The planned departure from Djibouti at 14:51, 18 minutes after our evacuation order. That timing goes into the record explicitly. Their intercept geometry. the line abreast formation across the evacuation corridor. Both Channel 16 transmissions with timestamps. Their deceleration sequence in response to the second transmission and the F/A 18 CAP establishment. The complete helicopter sortie timeline. Launch times, collection times, return times, passenger counts, overlaid against the plan formation's position at each moment. She looked at the intelligence officer. The planned support base departure timing. That is the lead item in the intelligence section of this report. 18 minutes. I want that number in front of every analyst who covers plan operational decision-making in the Indian Ocean. They were monitoring our evacuation order transmission. They made a decision to sortie within 18 minutes of receiving that information. That is a capability and an intent assessment that every commander in this theater needs to have. She looked at the communications officer. All and transmit to state. The humanitarian framework, the second Channel 16 transmission, the invocation of the UN Secretary General and ICAO and IMO. I want state to have the full text and the plan formation's response to it. Specifically, the deceleration that followed the second transmission. That is what humanitarian law looks like when it is invoked precisely and on the record in real time. She left the CIC at 16:53. 411 American civilians were aboard the carrier. The medical teams were working, and the planned formation was at 11 miles and steady. What had occurred in the Gulf of Aden on this Tuesday afternoon was a demonstration of a capability that the People's Liberation Army Navy had been building toward for years. The ability to position forces in proximity to an American military operation within minutes of the operation's commencement, using the overseas basing infrastructure that China had been constructing across the Indian Ocean and its approaches with the specific strategic objective of being present wherever American power operated. The planned support base at Djibouti was not an accident of geography. It was a position chosen because Djibouti was where American power projected into East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean, and because being present at that choke point, close enough to sortie within 18 minutes of an American operational order, was the operational expression of a strategic concept that China had been executing patiently and persistently for a decade. The planned formation had not fired a shot. It had not prevented a single evacuee from reaching the carrier. It had not caused a single helicopter to abort a sortie. What it had done was demonstrate presence, demonstrate awareness, and demonstrate the willingness to position itself across the operational geometry of an American humanitarian mission in a way that required a response, that required the Seahawk to launch, the FA-18S to go airborne, the Channel 16 transmissions to be crafted with legal precision, the entire machinery of proportional escalation to be engaged during a window when the carrier's attention and resources were divided between the evacuation mission and the developing threat picture. That division of attention is itself a strategic effect. It does not appear in any battle damage assessment, but it is real. And the planners who designed the Djibouti basing concept understood it as real when they chose that location for China's first overseas military installation. The carrier's next mission would be determined by orders from 7th Fleet. The 411 Americans aboard were safe. The Djibouti situation would continue to evolve, managed by diplomats and aid organizations and the governments with stakes in its outcome. And the plan formation was at 11 miles, watching, present in the Indian Ocean, as it had been present in the Indian Ocean with increasing consistency for the past decade, and would be present with increasing frequency for the years ahead. The ocean is wide, but it is not as wide as it was when only one navy knew how to use all of it.